Good morning. Welcome to our third installment of This Week at the Capitol. Because of some technical difficulties, we're coming to you on Tuesday this week instead of Monday. Um, but uh, but shout out to our tech crew, Justin,
Yeah.
for getting us squared away. I'm Dave Fraser. This is Bob McLaurin. Welcome to week three, Bob. I think we get to celebrate a little bit up front.
Yep.
Uh, on a big accomplishment last week, and that is that the direct distribution bill passed, and it passed both chambers on its way to the governor's desk at 146.25 million dollars.
Yep.
So, as you know, as we've mentioned in a previous one of these broadcasts, the governor had recommended 110. The interim committee had recommended 105, and so I'm feeling pretty good about 146 and a quarter. What are you thinking, Bob?
Yep. I mean, that was the total amount we got over 2 years in the last biennium. So, and it not only was a, a big amount, more than we've gotten previously, but it passed overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
There
It,
was very, very little opposition to the bill. And
it,
even some of the more conservative members of the Republican Party stood up and supported local government.
yeah.
So, I,
So shout out to all of you who helped with that.
yeah,
It makes a big difference when you're talking to your home legislators. Another good thing about that, Bob, I think, is that it kind of is now setting a trend of going back into the other direction.
yeah,
They had that kind of downward trend that got to the 105, and then we spent several years there,
yeah,
or several biennia there.
yeah.
And so now I like not only that we got more money, but that now we're trending
Right,
back in a better
right,
direction.
right.
Uh, Another big thing going on this week is tax bills. What can you tell us about that, Bob?
Well, it started when the session started today. There were, I think, 2021 tax bills. I think we're down to 8 now. And it looks like most of those are going to get across the finish line, and we'll have to see how they all get sorted out, whether you can be eligible for all the exemptions or just one exemption. But just briefly, the tax bills that are still alive are House Bill 3, which is a 50% exemption for those that are 65 and older and have lived in Wyoming in their house for 25 years. House Bill 4 expands the current property tax refund program from 125% of AMI to 165% of AMI. And that one will definitely make the finish line. Um, House Bill 45 is the Crago bill, and it's really got a lot of momentum. It places a cap on assessed valuation at 5%. So no matter how much your assessed valuation, the fair market value goes up, the assessed valuation can only go up 5%. Now in Senate revenue,
Now, I'm sorry, I may be interrupting what you were about to say, but there were some efforts to push that down even further.
yes,
Is that
and
right?
Senate revenue it was reduced to 3, um, and I am not sure. They were talking about it this morning, and I'm not sure if it stayed at 3 or is it 5, but it's somewhere in that range of 3 to 5%. That bill's got a lot of steam. It'll get across. I think it'll get across the finish line. House Bill 52 provides an exemption for your primary residence for based on some age and basically a homestead exemption. We like this bill because it has a backfill from the LISRA. And most of these bills,
For anybody that's watching that doesn't know what LISRA is, Bob,
that's the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account.
thank you.
That's the legislature's slush fund.
It's their savings
It's
account,
their
as it
savings
were.
account,
Yeah.
the one that they use the most.
Yes.
But that's a homestead exemption bill, um, and that's likely to pass. House Bill 103 is a trigger bill that, assuming that the constitutional amendment that we vote on in November passes, this would take the assessed value from 9.5 to 8.3%. And so the November question says that it creates a fourth class of property. Yeah. But if that question doesn't pass, then this bill is not is moot.
It's as if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Senate File 54 is basically mirror bill to House Bill 52. Provides a 25% exemption for residential property up to $3 million. That $3 million cap was put in by a representative from Teton County, where the values tend to be higher, and she was trying to help out some of her constituents. So that's a quick summary of the tax bills.
Now, you mentioned that there were so many more to begin with. And one of the interesting things with however many end up passing, and it may be most of those ones that you just mentioned, but it'll be interesting to see how they interrelate with each
Right.
other.
Right.
And of course, there may wouldn't be surprising if there needs to be some cleanup done in the future session because they don't interrelate well.
Right.
But there were some, there were some other bills that would have been significantly more harmful to local
Right.
government that haven't survived, and
Right.
so we're glad about that.
Yeah.
There were some that would have really kind of threatened our ability to
Right.
do the fifth and sixth, the
Right.
general purpose and special purpose taxes,
Yeah.
and so most. I think the good news is, the bad news is we may need to figure out how to deal with some of this. I think the good news is that most of the bills that are still alive are actually aimed at the problem and aren't overshooting the problem.
They're targeted at
Yeah.
the specific groups, and most of them have a backfill to protect not just the towns but the counties and the special districts, because the counties get way more property tax revenue than the cities do.
Yeah.
So it's a bigger issue for them than it is. But I think
You know,
at the end of the day, I think we're going to be okay on these tax bills.
yeah, and I appreciate your hard work on it. One other thing that I wanted to have you mention, Bob, something you've worked really hard on. We were working on a memorandum of understanding among our members on contractor licensing. That process kind of got short circuited when a bill came down on that, and
Right.
I wonder if you can just talk for a minute about
Okay.
Senate File 114
Okay.
and what it currently does. We think that we didn't like the way it was introduced, but the
Right.
way it is right now, and it just passed second reading, correct?
Yep.
I think we're pretty all right with the way it is now. Why don't you explain that a little
Well,
bit?
Senate File 114 is a bill that came out of the governor's office, sort of out of the regulatory reduction task force. But it was a bill that we hear that the governor was very interested in having passed. So the bill as drafted was in pretty bad shape. We were going to have to oppose it, but we got together with the Contractors Association, with the state building officials, and we worked a number of amendments. So the bill basically sets criteria. So you have to pass the ICC test, and you have to have so much training. But once you've taken a test in whether it's Laramie or Green River or Casper, you can take your card and go to any city and work without taking the test. Now you still have to meet all the insurance and bonding requirements of that individual city, but you only have to take the test once. So
And you still need to pay your license.
you
fee
still
and
have to
all
pay
that.
the fee to the reciprocal community. So so there will be no loss of revenue to those who are accepting those reciprocal licenses.
Yeah.
So that bill, really appreciate the work of the state building officials
Yes.
and some of the mayors around the state. It's in good shape. We expect it to pass third reading tomorrow.
Bob did some great heavy lifting on that, but it was a real team effort.
Yeah.
And those building officials and mayors that helped us out on that. Couldn't thank them enough.
Yeah.
Do you want me to, maybe I mention, unless you had anything else on that, I
Nope.
might mention Senate File 90. Senate File 90 is kind of our follow-up to the Amendment A campaign, and really is just the first of at least two steps. And that is just as a reminder to anybody who's maybe new to the conversation. In 2020, November of 22, we had a question on the ballot asking to amend the Constitution to allow local governments to invest in equities the same as the state was authorized to do in 2016.
Right.
And that passed by 57%, with 57% of the vote. This bill, Senate File 90, would be the first step. It would authorize the state treasurer to create a new fund, where a third fund that would be a little more aggressive, probably require a little more time to have your money in there and that kind of thing. and the treasurer will be making the rules.
Right.
Obviously, that'll be the first step, but it would allow that third one that our cities and counties and special district could send funds to for longer term investments, higher yield investments. The second, and that bill just passed on second reading.
Yep.
Wouldn't if you're watching this today, it wouldn't hurt if you hit your if you sent a quick note to your representative in the House, encouraging their vote on third reading.
Right.
Assuming this does pass on third reading, we've already asked for an interim topic to discuss the next step, which would be allowing private money managers to do that for cities to take the route of using a private money manager, and so
just more options.
More options.
Private. There's a couple of variations of that. So some of the larger cities are interested in that. Some of the larger counties are interested in that. So we'll be meeting with CapFin this afternoon about interim topics, and hopefully we can take the second step of that.
Yeah.
But this fund is really designed for long-term use. If you build a sewer plant and you have a sewer sinking fund, and you're keeping those funds until such time that you have to replace the plant in 20-25 years, or you have to expand the plant. So
or you have to close a landfill,
or close a landfill, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah.
that's a good bill. We really appreciate the help of Senator Guru and Senator Dockstetter getting that bill out, and
Representatives Wanitzer has done great work for us in the House. Yeah. So Bob, why don't we finish with your favorite topic? and it's it's been an interesting ride with the state budget. It would be entertaining if it wasn't so important. But why don't you kind of update us on the ebbs and the latest ebbs and flows on the state budget?
Well, as we talked about last week, Dave, the governor submitted a proposal to the legislature, a budget proposal of basically $11 billion, all funds, all in, including interfund transfers. And the House added $350 million of that. The Senate cut $750 million out. So they are about a $1.1 billion apart. Last week,
just a small $1 billion.
Just a small billion. Last week they appointed the Joint Conference Committee, and the House Conference Committee were the House Appropriators, Nicholas Larson, Stiff, and Trey Sherwood. The Senate, after what happened on day one, the president appointed Senator Kinski was the chair, and he appointed Senators Bouchard, Salazar, and Larson, who were not appropriators. They met. The House met. They met on Wednesday of last week. The House sent them a proposal.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but just for anybody who doesn't watch the process closely, when you say non-appropriator, what you mean is they don't have any experience, previous experience on the Appropriations Committee, which is who puts together
the budget. So long and short of it, they met on Wednesday. The House sent a proposal. The Senate didn't respond for 4 days. They met yesterday afternoon at 4:00, and after about 2 hours, the House declared they were at an impasse and walked out of the meeting. The House reappointed a second conference committee. The Senate went into session, and the president appointed a second conference committee, and
which was challenged,
and it was a very, very, very intense debate, probably the most intense debate I've seen in the building in my career. Very emotional, very, very intense, and they challenged the president's decision, basically tried to override that decision. And after about an hour of debate, the motion was to overrule the presiding officer's decision.
Was not to overrule.
It was to overrule. It was to overrule. It failed on a 15 to 15
Excuse me,
vote.
the motion was to overrule.
The motion was to overrule.
Which failed on a tie vote.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Thank you, yeah. We're saying the same thing, we're just...
Yeah. So a 15-15 tie, it failed. So the new committee, they're meeting today. They will likely have a budget tonight or tomorrow that will go back to the bodies, and if it passes each of the bodies, then we'll have a budget. If it doesn't pass, we'll be back here in May or June for a special session.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting because they finally, in this heated debate you talked about, people finally started saying extra days out loud.
yeah,
Fortunately, most of them were saying they didn't want to do
yeah.
extra days,
But
but we'll see. I mean, I do think it took, despite the clumsy way it did it, I think
yeah,
it took a good turn last night. I think we're likely to get, I think we're more likely to get a budget passed by the
well,
end of the
I think
session.
I do. If we do get a budget passed, I think they will take 2 or 3 of the extra days in order to be able to override any of the governor's vetoes. The original schedule was they were to get the budget to the governor yesterday, and
Yes,
that would give, because the governor has 4 days to make decisions, that gives them time to override while they're still in town.
yeah,
That that option
they
is
missed
gone now.
that.
Without extra days, that option's gone. So
Yeah.
uh,
So we'll see how that plays
we'll
out.
know in a couple of days whether we're
Yeah,
going to have a special session or not. So,
yeah.
but it's been a tough session over in the Senate. Yeah.
It's been an interesting ride for sure. Well,
So
Bob, appreciate what you do. Appreciate all of you who are watching. Appreciate everything you do that helps us. All politics are local, so when you're talking to your local senator or representative, boy, that's very helpful to
that's very
us.
helpful.
So, Bob, thanks again.
Thanks, Dave.
We'll
See you
see you
next
guys
week.
next week.